Oh, goody.
Alright, what's going on everybody? Zombies here again, and today we're back with another Mercenaries video. This time we're doing something a little bit different. If you cannot tell by the comp you're seeing here, this is an old game. And in fact, this is actually my first Mercenaries upload to YouTube. This is the first video I ever put up about Mercenaries. These are the games from that way back about week and a half after Merc's release back last October. And I thought it'd be fun to just kind of review this old footage and talk a little bit about what things were like with these comps at launch and whatnot. This was, like I said, really early on. So this was, I think, the 22nd. So Mercenaries had been out for about 10 days. People were still figuring things out, but one thing that everyone seemed to figure out was that Karen and Diablo were a real mean bench combination, and they were pretty much the go-to bench for almost every comp in the game. Another character you might notice here, Tavish, one that hasn't seen play in quite some time. Tavish was actually pretty prominent in the beginning because there was a very heavy presence of casters a lot of the time. So Tavish was one of the few really powerful greens that could kind of punish casters for doing their thing. Another thing you might be able to tell here by these openers is that Varden was also very popular. This is launch Varden, who was fairly different than the Varden we know today. Launch Varden used to only hit mercenaries, but hit all three opposing mercenaries with that 2 speed slow. And on top of that, the death rattle froze it dealt less damage, but it froze a character until the end of next turn, which was an absolutely insane ability and definitely played a big part in why Varden saw so much play, even in comps that weren't necessarily all focused on Frost, because you have to remember we only had really 2 main Frost characters, and they were both blues in Varden and Jaina. Lich King's another interesting one to mention here. There you can see the Varden interaction where it doesn't actually hit the summon there, but yeah, Lich King was way more popular because he was one of the few reds that people deemed kind of like good enough in the beginning that was kind of possible as an opener as well. And here you'll see I throw in Gruul. So Gruul was the reason behind me doing my first video on Mercenaries, because one of the old data scientists who used to work at Blizzard posted a little bit of Mercenaries info on Twitter, and apparently their internal statistics had Gruul really rising up in the ranks because he was really the only hard counter to Karen Diablo. Now, if you were around at launch, you probably remembered that didn't really last very long, as even with the super powerful fire resistance, Gruul was not a very good mercenary. That was pretty much the whole point of why you were playing him, was for that fire resistance. And so if they were able to deal with him or do things without relying on all that fire damage, you were just kind of SOL. So he was cool to see, and I always have a special place in my heart for Gruul because of this. But on top of that, dragons weren't really prominent in the game yet. We didn't have many dragons. I think it might have just been Alex Straza as our lone release dragon. So there really wasn't much dragon support going on yet. So Gruul didn't have dragons to counter, even though we know he isn't really the best dragon counter anyway. Kind of neat here seeing the opponent running Sylvanas. Sylvanas wasn't very prevalent actually at launch, but this was kind of around that time where people were figuring out what mercenaries are good, but they were still testing stuff. And I mean, that's what I was doing here with Gruul, obviously. There were also some bugs at the time. I don't know if there were any in this match in particular, but there were quite a few bugs at the launch of Mercenaries, and those did impact some of the games. Like, we're going to have a game coming up here where Rag has his anti-freeze equipment on, and Jaina's water elemental is still able to freeze him. So some little weird things there. Jaina also was bugged where her ice block wasn't working. Now, I don't know if that was still ongoing at the time of recording this. I think it was, because like I said, this was very shortly after release. But we'll see as we watch the games play out. Even here, though, Vol'jin still really strong right from the beginning. Just was that really nice kind of swap in revenge killer mercenary, and he was really good at it. basically way back in the beginning, there weren't that many good greens to lead with, to open up with, basically. And so that's why you see, and you're going to see as we go into the other games here, the prevalence of Tavish was way higher. But on top of that, and I don't think we see too much of it in this video, but it was very popular, was Samuro. Samuro used to be the other green that kind of made a big difference. Oh, I think it's this game where we're going to see the water elemental stuff. And I guess we might see if Jaina does end up getting popped or if the block does not trigger yet. Honestly, I don't think I would have won this game if it weren't for the freezing bugs, because as you can see here, Rag does have the extra HP, and this was in the time before we actually had Cookie HP. This was before Cookie came out, so he definitely has that anti-freeze and extra HP equipment, but it's down to pretty big Diablo and Rag, but luckily we do have that fire resistance, so you can see that that's really putting in a lot of work here, allowing our Gruul to stick around, and it's kind of why I love this comp so much, and I really wish I wish it did what it was trying to do better and could have actually been a real part of the meta instead of kind of a sort of meme-y counter that eventually just faded out, because even though it did a lot to reduce the damage of these powerful fire characters, most specifically Diablo, it just wasn't good enough on its own to deal the damage needed to actually kill Diablo before he would end up dying. So yeah, Karen Diablo was a menace from the start. Anyone who was around back then remembers Karen Diablo was just absolutely insane, and it really eventually it got more reined in over time as we got some more power crept mercenaries. But here we can see, and look at that, we also got an insane high roll there too. If they hit basically either of our other units, I don't know about Jaina, maybe not Jaina, because if Ice Block was working then it wouldn't repeat, but I think Ice Block was broken, so we got a crazy lucky 1 in 3 there. And again, you saw that Water Elemental got the freeze on Diablo. That really shouldn't have been allowed to happen. So I think the bugs at the start were also putting in a little bit of work for this comp too, because Gruul just wasn't good enough on his own, no matter how bad I really wanted him to be. And even though he looked really good in initial testing. Okay, so it looks like Jaina's Ice Block did work there. So it was actually only a 1 out of 3. So it seems they did fix that by this point in time. I couldn't remember how long it took them to fix that one. But yeah, surprisingly, we are going to win this basically off of the back of that freeze. The freeze totally saved us. Ragnaros was also a bit of a more popular character back in the day. Again, we really just didn't have a lot of options for good reds outside of people led with the Lich King fair amount of the time. There you can see Ragnaros doesn't actually get frozen, so it seems the bug was it wasn't preventing the other characters from being frozen, but it was preventing Rag. And then here we'll just finish off the Diablo with our barely alive mercenaries. So super close one. Again, we probably didn't deserve that win because of the bug stuff and whatnot, but still cool to see the comps nonetheless. And there was some flexibility in this opener, like you could go a bit more frost heavy or you could save Tavish for later, but typically this was our standard opener here and I liked it quite a lot. And as you can see by what the opponent has, it was pretty popular. And I think part of that was a lot of people wanted to play with their Lich King. Here you can see the opponent has Diamond Lich King, so they probably got the pre-order. As you can see, I didn't actually end up getting the pre-order, so it took me a while to get that Diamond Lich King. But he was really the premier red, and this was before all the buffs and whatnot we got more recently. He was just, the slow was seen as very, very powerful, and just none of the other reds were really doing as good stuff as he was on turn 1, where it was just generically good no matter what comp you were running him in. You appreciated the damage, you really appreciated the slow effect, and the slowing on everything was also really, really nice. Just had some nice synergy. I really liked this opener quite a bit. There was quite a lot of it though before we got the first Mercenaries drop, which we really didn't have to wait too long for in retrospect. But yeah, Tavish was actually kind of a beast. Tavish was, that explosive trap was not something to mess with, and there really wasn't anything you could do about it. You had to deal with him because a lot of comps were very focused on casters. And Tavish was the kind of ultimate punishment with Explosive Trap. He really made it annoying for casters. Now, this was before the full dominance of Frost, as Frost didn't really have enough characters to be a full team. So even though Frost was kind of part of the backbone of this comp, it didn't feel like a super Frost-focused build. You were more so just running the characters because they were good. As you can see, people weren't even running Varden, Jaina opens. Like, I kind of segmented them, though it was a possible open. Usually the one of each color opener felt a lot better. And with original Varden, it was actually way, way easier to get your cold snaps going because you always knew how much damage was going to be dealt to everything. So it was a lot easier to plan a turn or two in advance, whereas now Varden is random, so it's much harder to plan out the cold snaps, but I think that's actually a positive thing for the game. I think that's something they were going for, because endless cold snaps, or just like even just like 2 cold snaps in a row, or over 3 turns or whatever, it is miserable to play against. Like, it's cool that it exists. I like that they didn't totally nuke it, but it is not a very fun play experience to get cold snapped all the time, so I like that they were able to reduce the frequency with the changes we got. Also, that death rattle was absolutely disgusting, and you can see out here where their Karen is denied this turn. Like, that's so insane, and that's another change I'm really happy they made with Varden, because Varden could uber high roll you where they would freeze a character the turn they died that hadn't acted, and then that character is frozen for 2 turns. And if you haven't figured it out already, one of the strongest things you can do in Mercenaries is action denying. You're denying your opponent's mercenary making a move, you effectively shut down one of the 3 things they were doing that turn. You can do that 2 turns in a row. It's insane. It's like you're playing 2v3. It really makes a pretty big difference. Here you can see Gruul coming in absolutely clutch, because we would have gotten roasted there. Geddon, definitely kind of an off-meta thing here, but again, this was the earlier on stages before the launch meta had been kind of mostly solved with some of the best comps. So people were still trying stuff out. I know a lot of people, myself included, were really interested in making the fire comp work, but as I'm sure many of you know, it took a little bit longer for that to actually work out. I remember I actually used Tavish as a possible fire comp inclusion, but there just wasn't enough good ways of triggering the Baron Geddon on turn 1 specifically to make it kind of work out. Eventually we would get more units and fire comp would become more viable, but that would take a long time, because even when we got Belinda, fire comp really was not that great, especially compared to powerhouses like Frost. And here you can see, boom, they're out of here. They got hard countered by the Gruul. I still love the Gruul tech, even though he's not good. I hope he gets buffed someday, because I'd love for Gruul to be a cool meta choice again, whether if it's countering fire or if he was just a bit of a better counter to dragons, as now we have way more powerful dragons, and it would kind of feel more fitting if he was good against the dragons. So here we can see another comp that was very popular in the beginning but fell off kind of quickly is the Beast comp. So this had Rexxar, King Crush, and King Mukla, along with Mukla's big brother. Buff up all your beasts with Rexxar, maybe summon some more, and it was pretty good. It actually had some pretty explosive openers. The problem was, and you won't see that, I guess, from me, because I'm not running Karen Diablo on this comp, but this comp was incredibly weak to Karen Diablo, because they would have a really explosive start. Sometimes they would kill 2 of your mercenaries, and then you would just swap in Karen Diablo. They would have at least 4 things on the board, and you would just blow them up, because they'd already be weak from the residual damage of Crush swinging in for 1,000,000 damage. So, and here you can see we actually got pretty lucky with the freeze on Crush, denying, again, another action this turn, and just really, really powerful. Vol'jin going to be a nice kind of revenge killer here. It was very important to kill the Crush. Obviously, we don't have Karen Diablo on here, so I can't really punish their bigger board, but almost every comp was running Karen Diablo on the bench. So it was really one of those things where this comp popped up, people thought it might be good because it felt strong when it opened, and then it just kind of fell apart as your opponent transitioned into the late game because they could build their Diablo to crazy health just by and wiping your board at the same time, and then it would be hard for you to gain that same momentum back because a lot of the times your bench would be Karen Diablo, but in a Karen Diablo off, whoever has the bigger Diablo is probably going to win that depending on the supporting mercenary. Here you can see Rag again, so yeah, people really weren't sure what to put in that third spot, and here we see they have the red and the green on the bench, probably Karen Diablo. Rag was definitely a pretty popular one just because people were looking for other stuff to kill Diablo, but I think eventually he fell off a little bit, but he was pretty popular in the beginning stages of Mercenaries, despite Fire Comp not being the greatest. But I really like this comp. I thought it was a lot of fun, and I thought it'd be cool to just revisit my first Mercenaries games that I put up on YouTube. I thought it'd be cool for some of the newer folks to see what things were like at launch, and I actually have some plans for some future content that's going to be a little bit different than this, but it is going to focus around kind of taking a trip down memory lane and looking back at past Mercenaries metagames. So if that sounds interesting to you, definitely let me know in the comments below, because I think it'd be really cool. The game has had some really awesome and interesting metas, and it tells a really neat story that I think a lot of people who didn't play at launch kind of missed out on a bit. So want to kind of get that out there so people can re-experience what we got to live through without having to actually be there for it. It's really crazy how different of a game Mercenaries was at launch compared to how it is now. Well, we're about 10 months since release. But that's going to do it for this video. If you enjoyed it, do remember to like and subscribe, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.